Hi, and welcome to another episode of CivicList. I'm Matthew Camp. I'm joined by two candidates for New York City Council, Johanna Garcia and Dan Cohen. How are you doing today?
Great.
Doing great. Thank you.
Good. So happy you're here to join us and talk a little bit about City Council and why you're running. So that's my first question. Johanna, why would you want to run for City Council?
Why would I? I've often said that anyone that runs for office has to have a little bit of insanity in their brain. So it really does have to be a calling. And I think just having worked in government and worked with tenants association, parent associations, and seeing where we are as a nation, as a state, and as a city, there is a huge opportunity that we have to transform our elections and our representation on a city level. And my experiences as the daughter of immigrants, as a single mom of three, navigating the public school system with two children with IEPs, and really listening to my neighbors about corruption with the IDC and bringing that down, corruption with developers and taking over our communities and bringing down the rezoning. It's time for a voice like mine, and when I say like mine, I'm talking about Afro Latina daughter, son, non-gender youth feeling displaced, feeling evicted, discriminated, all that stuff. That voice has to be in the city council, and I'm really eager to amplify those issues, those voices in the city council.
So great, thank you. And so the audience knows Johanna's running for District 10 in Northern Manhattan. Thank you for sharing that. And Dan, how about you? Why do you want to run for
Right.
city?
I'm so glad you said that because I wouldn't want your viewers to think that I was running against her because if we were running in the same district, I'd drop out and endorse Joanna because I'm not that big a fool. I think she's superb. I'm running in the 7th, a different district adjacent to the 10th, for many of the same reasons. I'm motivated as a call to serve. I do think that if you decide you want to run for office, you should talk to a therapist first. Luckily, I'm married to one, so I get that service free. Don't tell the campaign finance board. I'm a parent as well, with a child in the public school system as well as a public school graduate, and the challenges of navigating in public school under optimal circumstances are trying for any parent, and the fact that we're trying to do this in a pandemic only adds, the madness up to 1,000. I work for a not-for-profit, working in affordable housing, and the affordable housing issue is the #1 concern in my district and is part of the motivation for my running for city council because I feel so strongly about trying to address the issue, and I don't believe that the current administration has done a particularly good job at that. But because I care about a lot of other things too, that's why city council feels like the next step for me. I want to work on education and transportation and climate change and a bunch of other issues. And the joy of working in affordable housing has been my pleasure, but the constraints of it has also prevented me from really exercising my work in other areas, and that's what's motivated me to run for city council.
Mhm. Yeah, so I'm hearing a lot about education, affordable housing, transportation, climate change. Certainly, your districts have a lot in common, running from the west side of Manhattan all the way up to Inwood, and there's so many issues, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of constituents that you would represent. I'm wondering, what's your process for discovering what's most important to voters, Johanna?
So, as a public school parent, as an education activist, I've I've had those conversations for a very long time with fellow parents about what's wrong with our schools, and I've experienced it firsthand. And as Dan mentioned, now in COVID time, those inequities are just too hard to ignore, even for those that have had their head burrowed in the sand. And it is conversations that I have constantly on a daily basis of what needs to happen to transform our schools and to change the definition of normal. There are discussions about going back to normal, but going back to normal is just simple. It's simply unacceptable for the majority of the students in our public school education. I know that firsthand, and I know that many parents in this district share that. And also in my work with Northern Manhattan's Not For Sale, talking to tenant leaders, feeling the squeeze. Right now, we already had an issue where individuals, families in our communities felt rent burden, but now with skyrocketing unemployment rates, now with dealing with food insecurity, which are huge issues, these are conversations that come to me on a daily basis, especially as chief of staff to Senator Robert Jackson. We are inundated with calls for help for people that are like, they just don't know what to do to keep their head above water. And it's very heartbreaking, especially when you know these are the elderly, these are moms. You sometimes have young college students saying, I need help, or there was even a student who in college who was going to drop out of college because he lost his only surviving parent to COVID, and 3 weeks later lost his other guardian, his grandmother, and all of a sudden he was responsible for his two younger siblings. And so we had to triage around that, and unfortunately it's not rare in our community. So it's really about keeping your ears open. I've had these channels of communications for a long time, but we have to do more to be out there.
Yeah, it sounds really challenging, and you being in your current role and your previous roles gives you a sense of what the important issues are. Dan, what's your process for discovering what's
Sure.
most important?
I mean, like Joanna, I'm also a longtime resident of my district, and so I've gotten to know people in my role as state committeeman. I've been the elected state committeeman for over a decade and have had a chance to talk to people over many years and form deep roots here to hear about what problems are occurring. It's not just in the past couple of months or in the pandemic, it's been over years what the knowledge that I've been trying to accumulate, the tiny bit of wisdom that I've managed to gather. Certainly in my work, I've seen the need for affordable housing. The projects that we've been involved in, not as a developer, but as a nonprofit sponsor, will regularly see thousands of people apply for a single unit of housing. That's routine in the city. And that kind of disproportionate demand with the tiny supply only highlights the need for more affordable housing. That's why I've called for the creation of at least 1,000 new units of permanently affordable housing in District 7 on sites that are either owned or controlled by the city. But your question was more specific about how do I learn what people are feeling and thinking. I'd say broadly, and I'm sure Joanna shares this sentiment, that New Yorkers are a cranky, outspoken bunch. I don't think that anybody, as a New Yorker, doesn't voice their opinions regularly. So I get an earful all the time. But also, I believe that the part of the campaign, part of this process of running for office is trying to talk to as many people as possible and hear what they have to say. It's more often than not, I'm not talking about what's on my mind and what I'm doing and what I want to do. It's more I'm listening to what people want me to do and what they care about. I rarely feel that there's any concern about not getting enough information. It's more just trying to fit in as much as I possibly can. And I've distilled it to really about 3 or 4 issues. I think Joanna and I are on page with probably just about all of them. And the education issue is pointed. I want to highlight Joanna's comment and absolutely echo it, where going back to normal wasn't great to begin with. It's not like somehow that if we return to normal, everything's okay again. I mean, District 3, which is entirely within the 7th, and District 5, also in the 7th, but District 6, which I share with Joanna across the 2 council districts, the school districts, District 6, School District 6, which I share with Joanna, has had a series of real challenges and serious inequities that need to be addressed. And it's partially about poverty. Let's be clear, we're talking about not enough resources. And Johanna and Senator Jackson, who she works for, have worked tirelessly to try to get federal funding, state funding from a lawsuit. $4 billion is owed to the city to help pay for education. We've been denied that. Now with a majority in the legislature that's veto-proof in New York State, perhaps we'll actually start to see some of that money. That's been a big part of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's surprised you about running so far?
What surprises me? I don't want to say that I'm not surprised by anything, because I've just seen and just so open to any possibility.
Johanna's so jaded. She's seen it all.
I'm not jaded at all. I'm the sense of idealism, it's just so important in our work. But actually, I am surprised by how quickly, and it's another characteristic of New Yorkers, we adapt. We adapt to circumstances that we never imagined we'd be in. We're seeing the elderly figuring out how to stay connected, whether it's huge like conference calls, telethons, like town halls, or figuring out how to get on Zoom. I'm always shocked when I see my mother like something on IG. Like my mom's on IG. So I'm really surprised at how people look for ways to be connected. Not that they want to be connected. That's definitely always part of what's been part of New York. And also because we are a city that had to deal with 9/11, I was not surprised that New Yorkers always want to step up and help one another. But we really, in this pandemic, had to really scratch our heads because of social isolation, because of having to be quarantined, because of the digital divide, because not everyone knows how to do it with our computers, because we don't have the infrastructure or free internet as we should. Every person should have access to free internet. But how neighbors really, and I want to really frame this the right way, how some were able to reflect on the privilege that they have, anchor that privilege, and assess who doesn't have that same privilege and help. And there's all kinds of privilege. There's two-parent home privilege, there's racial privilege, there's socioeconomic privilege, and there's privilege to access to government processes or elected officials, and understanding how to navigate that. And being able to reflect and say, we have to do something for our neighbors. We have to also look beyond our immediate backyard. When we look at how we won races in Georgia, when we look at how we got the majority in the US Senate, when we look at how we took down the IDC, how we got progressive individuals in the assembly, that happened because there were individuals that said, my immediate backyard or my living room might be okay, my refrigerator may be well stocked, but this is bigger than me, and I have to go beyond that. So that has the way that people have been persistent, because let's be honest, the pandemic tends to bog you down. When you think the curve is going down, you gotta double down. But people have been persistent in staying connected and helping each other. That's been gratefully surprising for me.
Yeah, I like this idea of, staying connected. That's, the objective of CivicList is to build community. And so it sounds like this process of reflecting on privilege and then taking action is a good method that you've seen and been pleasantly surprised. How about you, Dan?
I want to echo Johanna's comments. I'm continually surprised at the ingenuity that's been displayed by New Yorkers and the ability of people to adapt and to learn new things. My mother also on Zoom, not yet on Instagram, but nonetheless has become pretty savvy, and I find that to be wonderful. It's actually how we still communicate. We used to have Shabbat dinner in my home with my mom would come over on Friday nights, every week for many years, and now she can't because of the COVID risk. But we've been FaceTiming and Zooming so that she's been able to still see us, and it helps with her isolation. With my father's passing several years ago, she's alone, and that's been somewhat helpful there.
Yeah.
I guess I've also really been in the biggest thing that surprises me is the every time I think that the city hall has sort of reached a level of incompetence, they manage to surprise me by exceeding it, it's not just that. Yeah, I will point out actually to the schools something that I know that Johanna's worked hard on in her district, and that has been a persistent concern for me and mine, is there's still not everyone has access to be able to do remote learning. There are still a few thousand children, almost a year after the pandemic has been not addressed, but immersed in it, that they still have not been able to get remote devices and access to a few thousand kids. And that is, in fact, there's also a few thousand kids they can't find. My son's school, he's in third grade, and my son's school has about 400 children in it. So essentially 5 of my son's schools have disappeared off their radar. And I find that to be astonishing. And that really, I somehow had thought that they were, a year later, would have been able to get their act together. And that is remarkable that they haven't. And the one other thing I'll say that's been surprising, which I had not been prepared for, is, I don't know if Johanna's experienced this, but this is very lonely. The campaigning has been really lonely. You can't canvass, really. Like if I tried to go into a building and knock on doors and introduce myself, I'd get arrested. And it's really hard to do that in a pandemic. And so a lot of it is this, sitting at my desk, talking to my computer screen. And that's very lonely. That's very lonely. And I was not prepared for that. I have been, moments it's been very depressing and very sad. And that's, I'm generally I'm a cup half full. I'm usually a cup all the way full kind of person. And to feel sort of this sense of sadness has been surprising. I know that running for office, particularly in this country, we run as individuals. Other countries have parties. You run as a slate, as a whole group, and that's how you get elected. But here it's very individual, perhaps, reflecting America's cultural interest in sort of the rugged individualism. And I'm fine as an American. I understand that. But there was always a sense of interacting with people on the street and shaking hands and talking to them and having really intense conversations on the street, whether they were happy ones or arguments with people. I sort of relished that interaction, and the near total absence of that, or to be covered up with a mask, to be unable to see and read a person's faces and their emotions, has been very distressing. And I was not prepared for that, and that was a real surprise. And I think we're just going to have to deal with it until we can get past this. So,
May I add to Dan's excellent points, which were many, Dan. Mental health has always been undervalued as a priority. When you look at where our federal, state, and city dollars go, when you look at some of the ills of our society, or what I call the gaslighting of issues, mental health just doesn't get the attention that it deserves. It's getting more attention. And I have seen that when you have a disproportionate impact on of an issue, of a consequence on minority groups, it's like you're like going against the wave. This is important. This is important. When then it includes the larger swath of who's there in the demographics, in terms of wealth, then it's an issue that gets elevated, because like, hey, and sometimes that's fine, because we every movement was never won in isolation by those impacted. It's won with allies, always. So it's always important to build bridges in issues. But yes, mental health as a candidate is difficult. My daughter went back to college, I think a week ago. Uh, I think she's getting sick of my texts like, "Hey, how are you? Love you. You're great. Be your own joy." I look to my son, who's just like, video games is his life, and I'm talking to his headphones. Um, so it is difficult, but I also see it in my community with especially immigrant Latinx communities. There's, we're so like, what do you mean I can't kiss you on the cheek? I can't hug you. And sometimes culturally, I keep a distance, but I see there's a little bit of offense there. So mental health and just like the way that we're interacting with each other is something to contend with. But I really wanted to piggyback on what Dan said about the city's ability to just continue to be reactionary to
Yeah,
what we've been going through in this
appears to be
pandemic.
no forethought. Just
Seriously, I mean, some of it is systemic. So you would
yeah,
think there is data research, and they've been doing their own kind of listening tours to come up with policies that make sense. But they continue to fail to do that. It's why parents are kind of like yo-yo, like, are we in today? Are we not? What's up? What's down? But also, let's talk about public safety. Let's talk about how tone deaf City Hall has been.
yeah,
Let's talk about the protests that occurred, the peaceful protest that occurred over the summer, the mountains of testimony of police brutality, of videos that we've seen, and still we heard from City Hall, no, that there was trust that things were, dealt with appropriately. And it took a formal investigation for them to admit and that is part of why I'm excited of people like Dan and me going into the city council, because we have to start making sure government listens to the people. It's
yeah.
not like we didn't hear it. It's not like we didn't know. It's not like there wasn't every single reason to believe that what we were seeing, what we were hearing was systemic racism and that it had to be dealt with. There is a level of tone deafness that has had just detrimental impacts to our community.
Yeah, it's good to hear that people like you are running for office because you are connected to the communities and you could help amplify that message, especially to the executive branch, the mayor's office, if and when you're elected. So the election you are running for is only 2-year terms, right? And that's a new shift. And then there's another set of 2-year terms, and then I think they're going back to 4 years after that. So there's a little bit of like uh, education. I think even the voters, we need to know about that. Like that's unusual. That's only 2 years, and 2 years goes by so fast. So I interviewed Eric Adams recently and asked him about if you were to win mayor, let's say 2 terms, and then it's 8+ years out from today, what would the city look like and what are the hopes and aspirations? So I want to ask you two something similar to that. Even though you're running for a short, 2 terms, what's your hope for the city to look like in 10 years from now?
Do you want to take that? Do you?
Sure, sure. I'll just on the 2-year term thing. I mean, that's actually built into the city charter. Every 20 years, just the way that the city elections, because they're on odd-numbered years, we have two-year terms, and then we shift back to a 4-year term.
I'm too young to remember that, but yes.
I'm old. So we actually had this 20 years ago. We had 2-year terms where people then ran and then they got reelected, and then they served a full 4-year term for a complete 8 years. So Johanna and I, when we get elected to city council, will have 8-year terms, even if they're essentially 3 of them together. The 10 years, the 10-year question is a good one, because if you try to think about where were we 10 years ago, right? I mean, at the end of, say, 2010, we had just come off a really bad recession that had led to substantial job loss and significant economic dislocation across the city and across the country. And that was, we were beginning to crawl out of it. We were beginning to see a new moment. We were just turning into a new presidential election. I think Obama had not yet announced, but was preparing to. No, wait, I'm sorry. 2008. He was running for re-election, and he was finishing his. I'm all turned upside down. No, sorry. He had not yet announced. It was George Bush's final term, and Barack Obama was running, right? Am I doing this all wrong? 2016? No, he got elected in 2008, so it was 2012. All right, so we're in the middle of Obama's term. Got to get the scheduling right. Next time, Johanna goes first, because clearly I have no idea what I'm doing. But I think we were hopeful. I think there was also some disappointments that we didn't get all of the things that we wanted. You know, I mean, that we saw the sort of both the possibilities of the Obama administration partially realized with Obamacare and healthcare, but then also the disappointments of where things fell short, both because I think of a calculated mistake and misstep on the part of the Obama administration, thinking that somehow if they had a good argument that they'd be able to convince Republicans to go along with them. We're not going to make that mistake this time on the federal branch. And the challenges of a new administration coming in with de Blasio. I mean, I was snookered by de Blasio. I supported him when he ran the first time. I thought he had thoughtful ideas, and he seemed to be patient and seemed to be, he hadn't yet served, but he was running, and I thought some of the other candidates who were running didn't seem practical and realistic. I liked the fact that he came from hardscrabble roots, and they had a multiracial family, and I thought that there was promise there. So 10 years later, I think we can say a lot of those things fell short, and that identity wasn't sufficient to be sensitive. As Johanna rightly pointed out, that personal experience didn't translate into political and professional point of view. And the very people that protested over the summer, and the very causes that we protested over the summer that would have a direct impact on his family and his community, have been largely ignored. And the fact that it took a federal or state intervention from the Attorney General to point out where human rights and civil rights were repeatedly violated by the cops is kind of astonishing.
And how about jumping to 10 years from today?
Yeah. I mean, I'm hopeful that for the most part, I don't see mayors tend not to make the mistakes of their predecessors. They make new ones. So I believe actually that we'll probably be in a better position when it comes to racial and economic equity really, because the current crop of mayors, with few exceptions, have talked about that as an important issue that they want to work on. I anticipate with a progressive city council that we will shift our focus towards providing affordable housing for the people who really need it, which is people who make less than $40,000 a year. In both of our districts, in the 7th and the 10th, we're almost the same in terms of economic need. It's people under the $40,000 limit, which very little affordable housing at that level is being constructed. So I see that as progress, but there'll be other things that I think we're going to miss. I think the challenges in education are going to be very hard. We didn't get to this level of educational segregation in the de Blasio term. It's been decades in the making, and it will require hard effort for it to be changed. I am personally hopeful that that is going to happen with a newly invigorated city council, but I am also maybe a bit of a cynic, where I'm prepared for the fact that it's going to be very difficult to make those changes, and that we're going to have to work even harder, and that 10 years from now, some changes will be made, but not nearly enough. Mm-hmm. That isn't pessimistic. I'm trying to be, maybe manage my own expectations. Hopefully that
sure.
You're trying to make sure that you 10 years later won't look back at this and say you were wrong.
Right. I'd love to be able to say, well, only in the wrong that's like, oh no, we've made so much more progress. Look at that. Everybody's got an excellent education. We got the $4 billion. Look, it's fantastic.
Yeah. I think that, 10 years ago, we had Bloomberg for mayor, and
Yeah.
I was in the city council for that. I know how difficult it was to deal with an executive branch that was so focused on who thought stop and frisk was a great idea in policing our communities, that thought it was a good idea to treat our public school system as corporations and
Yeah.
business models, that thought that charter schools were the best thing to come to our neighborhoods. And 10 years from now, um, I hope, and I really hope, and I'm pretty positive that we will see the result of the reckoning that we're seeing now. Right now, there's been, since we experienced the Trump administration, a call for transparency, accountability. These are not sexy words like, being progressive, it's a sexy word. It sounds pretty bureaucratic, right? These words, transparency and accountability, but it is the best gift that we can give to the democratic process, because it is only within those windows that we can hold our electeds accountable, that we can learn how these archaic processes have worked against us, how we can organize to change it, how we can create movements to wake people up and be part of the solution. And what makes me really hopeful is that waking up, that, hey, there's this thing, transparency and accountability, that really matters. It's trickling down to a younger generation. We have to think about the younger generation right now. They're going to be even more prepared than we were in 10 years from now. I remember having a back and forth with my own kids. I was teasing them and calling them Zoomers, which they didn't appreciate. Then they say that I was a boomer, and I said, no, sorry, I'm Generation X, proud Generation Xer. Um, we're good in a pandemic. We have all those traits. But my discussions with the young people in my house, I know, are similar discussions that are being held in many living rooms, at many kitchen tables, and you see more of our young people providing testimony, hitting the streets, marching, protesting. They will be in office. So I'm really hopeful of what 10 years will come from now. And then 10 years from now, we will see smaller class sizes. We will see our schools fully funded. We will see more investment in our communities. We will see less of a need for policing poverty and mental health. And we will see better, equal, higher access to health care, because we're here now, but we are mindful. And when I say we, I'm including you, Matt, doing this program. I'm including Dan. I'm including myself, and so many progressive minded people running for office right now. We are mindful that we are temporarily carrying the mantle for those that are coming after us, for those that we are mentoring, and that we are making sure is not a conversation about wait your turn. It's a conversation, your turn is now. Your voice is now. This table is yours now. And that's what I hope we will see. And I'm pretty sure if our youth have anything to say about it, that's what we'll have in 10 years.
That's wonderful. That's super
And
exciting.
I will have learned 10 years from now to always let Johanna go first. I mean, I think I knew that, but I definitely should have let her go first. And I would like to amend all my previous comments and just say what she said. Yeah, I'm down with that. Yeah.
Well, I think between what you've both said today, we've learned a lot about your backgrounds, your candidacy, your goals for the future. Is there anything else before we wrap up? Any other people, organizations that you want to give a shout out to, or any other closing thoughts that we haven't covered?
I definitely want to give a shout out to every parent association. I think people take for granted the kind of organizing that happens at a level, at a school level. A shout out to every tenant association, but also those that have been helping us do that work, like Alliance for Quality Education, small class sizes. Uh, we have all the indivisible groups that have been doing this work, and all the youth groups that have been out there. I want to give a shout out to all the community-based organizations that have yet to receive their allocation from the city and state, and have been doing more with less in this pandemic. And last but not least, I need to give a shout out to the educators that show up in front of a computer or in the classroom every day to make sure that our young minds are not lost. So thank you.
I echo that and just say that the two organizations in specific that I'd want to shout out to are WEAC, West Harlem Environmental Justice Organization, which has been at the forefront of providing environmental action and environmental justice in West Harlem. And the battle isn't won yet. There's still a lot to be done, but I admire their record of achievement, and I'm excited to be a part of it, and hope to carry their banner forward if I'm elected to the city council. And the other is a group called Cloth, which has been a longtime stalwart also in the Community League of the Heights, which has been critical at providing social services, human services, and affordable housing in actually both our districts. And they have been absolutely necessary. And we need both those groups, and we need a lot more like them to be able to get where we want to go. This has been great, Matt. I really appreciate you taking the
Yeah.
minute.
Likewise, and I'll mention the New York Youth Civics Initiative, and why YCI.org is a new group that I think you both be interested in, that is getting together youth across the city and the state to work on civics and environmental causes, and they've got a lot of great programs coming up. So that's just my little shout out to them. Thank you both so much. Really appreciate your time. I'm going to hit the stop button recording, but thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.